Hello, everybody. Robert Villar here. I hope you are doing well. Going to go through a video today using a free textbook published by Open Oregon Educational Resources. The title of the book is Beginning Excel 2019. In case you don't have the book already, here is the link, and I will go ahead and allow you to pause the video while you download the book at this website. It is also available in the video description. Welcome back. As far as the table of contents goes, this is a 6-chapter textbook. Chapter 1 are fundamental skills. Chapter 2, mathematical computations. Chapter 3, formulas, functions, logical, and lookup functions. Chapter 4, presenting data with charts. Chapter 5 deals with tables. And then the final chapter is multi-sheet files. Now, this textbook will obviously take a lot of time to cover. So this video in and of itself essentially will cover Chapter 1, Fundamental Skills. This chapter will be further broken down into 6 chapters. First one being overview of Excel, entering, editing, managing data, formatting data, analysis, printing, chapter practice, and then an assessment. Again, for anybody who still doesn't have the textbook link, you can find it at the hyperlink that is identified here. So in Chapter 1, Fundamental Skills in Excel, we're going to go ahead and get started this section specifically with Chapter 1, Section 1, Overview of Microsoft Excel. The following learning objectives are the ones that we'll be covering. Examine the value of using Excel to make decisions. Learn how to start Excel, become familiar with Excel workbook, understand how to navigate worksheets, examining the Excel ribbon, examine the right-click menu options, learn how to save workbooks, examine the status bar, and finally, becoming familiar with features in the Excel help window. Now that'll be section 1.1. We'll go ahead and have an additional chapter where we'll discuss sections 1.2, 1.3, etc. So let's delve right into Excel. So how do we open Excel? Well, we start by navigating in our computer to Excel. In my case, I already have Excel pinned to my taskbar, so I can simply right-click it and select open. I can double-click it with my left mouse button. But I have other options. I can type in the search function. I can type Excel, and here is the option. I could basically double click it and it would open it up for me as well. Now, Excel has to be installed in order for you to be able to work this. There are alternatives. If you do not have an actual desktop version of Excel, there is Excel for the cloud. So it's Microsoft has an Office 365, and on that one you would be able to also be able to access Excel. Now the interface may be a little bit different. This is a good opportunity to tell you that the interface between Excel on a PC-based computer versus a Macintosh-based computer, an Apple-based computer, is going to be different. I am teaching this from a PC perspective. However, there are some things that I will absolutely be mentioning that are specific to Apple people, especially at the very beginning of this video. So once we have opened and navigated to Excel, your Excel will look something like this. So what we have here are essentially a big spreadsheet. And if you can think about Excel, it is a combination of columns and rows, and those columns and rows allow us to store data. So as we start in Chapter 1, I think the first question that we should ask ourselves is, why do we use Excel? And what is Excel going to be used for? And basically, I can guarantee you that Excel will be used in almost any potential career that you have, any job opportunity that you have, as you go through your education you will absolutely be using Excel. Excel is a tool that can be used either as a business tool, but it can also be used as a personal tool. And so we'll see examples of where we can use it to do a personal budget versus do something more from a business perspective. So we've already gone through the objectives in this chapter. And for those of you who have downloaded the book, the electronic version of the book will allow you to essentially click and it'll take you to the next chapter or the next module of the book. In this case, we're talking about 1.1, the overview of Microsoft Excel. Here are the learning objectives that we had previously discussed. As we navigate through the book, let me make this a little bit smaller. You will see that there are printed page numbers on this book versus electronic page numbers. And so when I do make a reference to a page number, I am referring to the actual printed page number that would be on the bottom or on the top of your PDF or whatever format you downloaded the file. In this chapter, we're essentially going to create this spreadsheet in figure 1.1. So at the end of this chapter, we will have created this spreadsheet completely from scratch. And so in this one, we're going to have a little bit of data entry, and essentially we're going to get to what looks like a retail sales table given information to us on a monthly basis. It's basically we have the unit sales, the average price, and the sales per dollars. Okay, those are the sales dollars for each month. And then there's some totals on the bottom. Now, chapter 1 doesn't really deal too much with formulas. We'll definitely dive deeper into that when we go into chapter 2, but this is a good place to start, and we will do a little bit of math today. Now I'm going to switch back over to Excel so that we can follow along in the book. So what are we going to do? We're going to use Excel to enter quantitative data into the computer. We're going to manipulate that. We're going to format it. We're going to apply mathematical computations so that at the end, we can convert that data into information. We use information for decision-making, both as professionals in our careers. We use it in our personal lives, in our academic lives as well. As you go through the book, for those Apple users, you will have that apple with the bite in it. That is your signal of when there is something that is important for you, and you should pay attention to it because it's going to tell you specifically how to look at something. So let's do the quick overview of this Excel screen, and I will start by telling you that your screen and my screen probably look different. And I'm going to say more likely than not, it looks different. So one of the things that I have done is I have made my interface very large so that it can be seen on the computer on the video when you're watching this video. So as a result, a lot of my menus have been truncated. Not just that, things like the menus. So up here where we have file, home, insert, page layout, those menus, or Excel calls them tabs, are customizable, and depending on the tab options that you have already pre-selected, that's what's going to show up for you. We'll see in a little bit how we can actually make those modifications. Up here, you see that I'm in an autosave format. That means that this file is automatically being saved every time I do a transaction. Now, for you, that's not the case because you've just opened a blank file. So until you do that first save, that autosave function won't even be available to you. That file that you opened up here where mine says Excel chapter 1, yours is going to say book 1 or something to that effect. Up here, you see the little floppy disk thing. That is the save button. I have some quick toolbars that are available there. So I have the undo, the redo, the format painter, and this quick access toolbar allows me to select the down menu and do additional manipulations and turn on additional options such as new file, open a file, email, quick print. And actually, I want to turn on the quick print because one of the things that we're going to want to be able to do is preview our workbook as we go along. Now, I have a PDF printer set up. So in my case, it is at this point trying to create a video for me. A PDF for me. And so by creating that, trying to hit the quick print to that PDF file, it essentially prompted me to save a file somewhere. And so you would give it a name, give it a location on where to save it to. And once you hit save, it would go ahead and create, in this case, that that Adobe file for me. If you did have a printer connected, it would actually just print to that printer. Okay, that's what that quick print is going to do. But these are the options that are available under the quick access toolbar. They are customizable, and the more that we go, the further that you explore, you'll ultimately determine which things you want in there. Okay, well, let's keep exploring the tab. So I clicked on the file name, and there is the file name that I have. And if I wanted to change the file name, I could simply click on it and change the file name. I can identify the location to where I'm going to save it and things like that. Next to that, I have a search feature. And then it gives me who is logged in. In this case, I told you I was Robert Villar. I'm logged in as Robert Villar. And it has my little profile picture on there. Okay. Then we have the little dash, that is to minimize. The kind of squiggly box, that is to, make it a different size. That would also allow me to manipulate it and maybe show something else on my screen, where I could basically manipulate that left and right. So let's say I wanted 2 files, I could do that. I can also hit that big square, and it'll maximize my Excel window. And then the X, that's going to close my Excel. And so that's the last thing that we're going to do. And we're not going to do that probably on video today. So then we go to the tabs. And our tabs include File, Home, Insert, Page Layout, etc. Now these files are customizable. These tabs are customizable. So depending on your setup, they may or may not look different. The important thing to know here is that just like Dorothy, when you don't know where you are, double click your heels, click that home button and go home. A lot of what we will be doing is going to be found in that home button. There are other specific tabs. So as we continue with the tabs, anytime that we click on a particular tab, it changes the area below that Excel refers to as the ribbon, okay? And so the ribbon has different areas to it. And so in this case, the first part of the ribbon is called the clipboard. Then I have font, alignment, I have a numbers, a style, etc. Now, I should mention that for those Macintosh or those Apple folks, this is not the default setting. And so the tab, the ribbon subsection names are not there by default. There is a little note in the book as far as how you would be able to identify that and get it. Okay. A couple other things that I want to highlight down here on towards the bottom. You see all of these tabs, and in your case, you probably only see the sheet 1 tab. I have way more tabs because I've been working on this file. I've been practicing and might even have a couple of shortcuts in here to save me some time. and do a fast forward. But basically, if you needed to add a new worksheet, there's a little plus sign down here, and you can click that and it'll create a new worksheet for you. You can right click and also do an insert and be able to insert. You could delete, you could actually add colors to them. And so all sorts of different things that you could do from here. In Excel, like most Microsoft projects, your mouse is going to be important, right? A lot of things are going to be left click or right click, but that's not it. There's going to be a couple other ways that we can interface with our software. Towards the bottom, all the way to the right, we see our zoom controls. And you can see that I can zoom really close, really out. That middle line is essentially 100%, okay? I could also click on that 100% number, and it would let me identify at what parameter I want to set it, and once I hit OK, it'll either shrink or zoom out to that number, okay? That's called the zoom slider, okay? So that little thing will let you zoom left and right. We then have a page break view, a page layout view, and a normal view. And so basically, these will let you have different viewing of what this document is actually going to look like, okay? And so as you go through there, some of the things it will do will actually change your view into a page, into the page layout view. And in order to get back out of that, you would click on the normal, and that would bring you back to what we are used to seeing. So most of the time, we're going to spend it in that tab. So you can navigate through your worksheets. This area in white is referred to as your worksheet. You have a series of columns that are lettered alphabetically, starting in A. And then if we needed to scroll, we have these two bars here, right? There's a bar on the up and down, and there's a left and right bar that we could use to drag along. But we could also use our cursor and keep going. And so what Excel does is basically it has alphabetically their 26 letters, A through Z, but once it gets to the end of the alphabet, it starts repeating columns. So it says A, B, A, C through A, Z, and then it goes to B, A, B, and it continues that way. And so that allows you to have way more columns than you will probably ever need to use in an Excel file. Now, as far as rows, there is a limitation on how much information Excel can hold. There is a point where Excel may not be the best solution for you. You may want to go more into database, but I have found that as a Power Excel user, I rarely have to go beyond the limitations of an Excel workbook. So the columns and the rows, when we intersect and we click somewhere, that intersection is the address for that cell. And so at this point, I have highlighted column C, row 2. And I know that because I have this address over here on the top left-hand side in the name box, and it's actually named that the column and the row. And so Excel is always going to identify things for us as column first, row next. But that's not it. We could select a different row or a different grouping. And when we have that grouping, okay, that range, okay, is essentially the range. So we went from A1 to D4. That area there, that cell range, Excel is going to refer to it as the upper left to the bottom right. And so it would be A1 to D4 or D5 if I follow the instructions in the book. And so if you needed to make reference to that range of data, okay, in Excel, it would be referred to as A1 colon D5. Okay, that would be the address for this range of data that I had selected here. And so it's important that we know that just like the GPS in your car, in Excel, you can use a cell reference or a range reference in order to use calculations. And so in this chapter, we're not really doing a lot of calculations, but so we go into chapter 2 and we start seeing mathematical functions, etc. This will make a lot more sense to you. What I do want to highlight here is that this green box around our Excel selection, that shows us which fields are active. And that's important because when we have active fields, we can do things to that entire grouping at once. And so in this case, I highlighted everything in red. All right, I changed the fill and everything to red, and only the ones that were within that green box were highlighted, or A1 through D5. Now remember, we have this undo button, and Excel lets you undo a bunch of stuff, and so you can keep clicking undo, undo, undo. And I'm just going to show you that by doing so, even that text that I had written went away. So the undo function doesn't work for just one, and the redo basically is the opposite of the undo. It provides the last thing that was undone for you. Okay. So back to the ribbon. The ribbons are dynamic. So depending on the tab that you are, the ribbon information is going to change. So for the Mac people, the structure's slightly different, right? Some of the drop downs are not, so you actually have drop downs. So rather than having, if you were to click on a particular tab, you would have a menu that came up below that. You can also choose to have the view change to the ribbon format, and instructions for that are on page 10 if you are a Mac user. So in each ribbon, you have a group title or group title names, and so the clipboard area. And it's important to know there's a couple of different little things here. When you see the down caret, or the caret or the down little symbol, down arrow, that means that if you click that, that is a menu that has more options, versus something like when you see the scissor here, there are no options. That just lets you cut, right? That's the only thing that that button does. But the down means that there are additional options. Okay, so that's how you can tell that that's there. You also have, next to the group title name, in my case, I really zoomed out my screen so not everything fits in real estate wise. But if that's your case, you have this little, I guess it's an expanding box, and you click it, and it brings more stuff out to you. Okay. You can also go and play around with it, and you see that some of the stuff that's in that main section of the ribbon is also in that expanded option. Okay. And these are all meaningless to you for right now, but they will mean something later, right? And so this is a good time for you to go ahead and practice. Just click. We're not doing anything. We're not going to hurt anything. That's the beauty of this, is you're really not going to hurt anything. Worst case is you're going to have to start over. And frankly, if you're going to do this right, you're going to start over a lot. So what do the different tabs do? Well, let's first start by figuring out how we can customize the tabs and what kinds of things we can do. So the file menu is the only one on here that is not really a, won't get us to a ribbon. And so by clicking on the file, that file essentially gets us to what's called the back of office or the back of house for our Excel file. You should be able to scroll down and you should have a something that says options. Because I'm zoomed out, I had to go into a sub menu. But when we have that, we see that we have a bunch of things that we can change. So like one of the very first ones that I'll highlight is for general settings, you can change the size of the font that you want Excel to automatically use, how many worksheets you want it to automatically populate for you. Just things like that, right from the very beginning, right? You can also customize the quick access toolbar. Remember, we already showed you what some of those options were, but this gives you way more options and more flexibility. Not just that, but you could basically reorder stuff on here, right? And so you could use your buttons, your up and down arrows to reorder things on your quick access toolbar, or your ribbons as well. And so what we have here under the customized ribbons is you see all of the ribbons. And basically the left-hand side are available ribbons to you. And on the right-hand side are the main tabs that will show up for you. And the ones that will actually show up are the ones that have the green highlights. And if you don't have a green highlight on something, well, you can add it. Or you don't want to see something, you can take it away. Or let's say you want to see what other information is in there, you can expand the arrow, right? And it'll give you an idea of what options are actually there. Now, all of this stuff will automatically populate for you. At this point, we don't really have too much control over what actually shows up, but whether the ribbon or the tab is available to you or not is important, right? And so at this point, I have mirrored the tabs on the textbook, and those are home, insert, page layout, formulas, data, review, view, help, draw, and developer. Now, for the folks who are using the Macs, the help tab is not available in Excel for Mac. And so you won't see that as an option for you. Okay. So this is essentially how we look. You can make these changes. You can rearrange stuff using up and downs, right? However you want. And then once you are done, you're going to go ahead and hit OK. And it's going to say, hey, I need to close and close in order for this to take effect. In my case, that was because I had done a change to the font. If you only did a change to the menus, that would not have changed, okay? But because I had changed the font and I was able to exit out of that so that didn't happen. So if you're still stuck on that home menu and you want to go back to your worksheet, you have this little arrow in the circle, you click it and it brings you back out to your worksheet. So what else happens? Well, if you are in your worksheet and you click on any cell, you have the right click option. And so you can do a right click. Now, for those people on the Macs, you don't have a right click, but you can hold down the control key and then click on your mouse button and it'll act like a right click. The right click menu is my best friend. I live off of the right click menu. I spend a lot of time in the right click menu. And so if you right click any cell, by default, there are two different menus that are going to populate for you, okay? So both menus will open up for you. You will see one that kind of gives you formatting options, right? Which font, the size of the font. Do you want to increase the font size, decrease the font size? Do you want to format numbers as in accounting format? But there's a drop down there that also lets you select whether it's in euros, pounds, dollar, different accounting functions. You can make things percentages, comma separated values. You can merge and cell and center fields. You can bold, italicize, justify, fill with color, and you have color options. Font colors as well. These are borders. So basically, a lot of the information that shows up on our home ribbon when we right-click also becomes available. Increase decimals, decrease decimals, and then format painter. And we'll see a lot of these later on. Some we won't touch today, but we will definitely touch them all if you follow along in these videos. The other one is the menus, and you have a search feature, so you can actually search the menus. And this gives us some additional options. Again, a lot of these are in our home ribbon. So we see our cut, copy, paste, paste special, smart lookup, insert, delete, clear content, get data. Some of these are very advanced. Comment and notes, that those are very helpful when you are interacting and sharing with other individuals. Formatting cells. Links, these are advanced features. We'll cover some of these in chapter 6. Okay. So hopefully that has given you a quick introduction into the ribbons, the tabs, the ribbons. I am going to click back on the file menu just because there's some things that are important here for you to know as well. When you do click on the file menu, it basically prompts you to some information. Basically, it lets you create a new worksheet. It lets you do other things. Has a history of those transactions, of those files that you've recently been working on. If you have anything pinned that it's an important file that you need to use regularly and want to have readily available, that option is there also. If you have stuff that has been shared with you, that'll be there too. You can see when stuff was modified, etc. On the left-hand side, we have the home, new, open, information, save a copy, that's your file save as an Adobe PDF. You can print, and in the print, you have different options. So if you are at a selected printer, it will give you a preview of what that will look like. You can share. And under the share option, it lets you create a PDF of the document that you're working on. You can share you can do fancier shares on Adobe, and you can export this file into either a PDF or an Excel or a XPS, which is a PDF type document. You can also change it to different file types, and that if you're moving over to a different software system, that may be beneficial to you. A lot of times we are using comma separated values or tab separated values to import data. And so you may be creating the data. And so you would want to change the file type from the traditional XLS. Under the more, we have the options to publish, to close, account, that is the account that you are logged in as. The options we've already kind of explored a little bit. There are more options, right? So there's some basic options as the user. There are options related to formulas, options related to data and data integrity, how you want to proof it, when you save it, how you want it to save it, how often you want it to auto-save, language preferences, accessibility, advanced features as well. We already talked about the 2 customizations. The add-ins make Excel even more powerful. And so those are features that you can add in to add features to Excel that you may not already have. And then the trust centers, that's going to be important if you are working on, or you are using information from other files. That is something that the trust is important. Okay. So we're back at our home screen. We've kind of gone through our preferences. This is probably a good time to do a file save as. So let's go File, Save a Copy. You're going to identify where you're going to save it, give it a name, and you're going to save it. And now you have saved that file. Now, the book is telling you that this file should be saved as CH1, merchandise, city, sales data. And that's important because as you go through chapter 1 over the next 6 chapters, 4 of them will be using this same file. Okay. So that is important. Now, there are keyboard shortcuts, right? You could hit an F12, and that would also do it for you. If you don't like using your mouse, you can also hit the Alt key on your keyboard. And what that does is it creates these little shortcuts for you, either numbers or letters. And so based on the numbers or letters, you can now use your keyboard or your cursors and navigate through the lettering, right? Another Alt makes those things go away for you. On the Mac, your shortcut is going to be Shift S. So Shift S will get you some of those shortcuts. The status bar. So down here, it says that we are ready. So down here where it says, accessibility, investigate, ready, there are things that you can do. You can right click anywhere on that bar, and these are the things that'll show up on your status bar. And so, and I want to show you that my cap locks shows that if my cap locks is on, my status bar will show that my cap locks is on. And so, well, look at that. I just tabbed my cap locks on, and I can see that the status bar has changed to tell me that my cap locks is on, right? And that might be beneficial or helpful to you. It may be worthless to you, but it's one of those things that sometimes it's important to know. But that's not all. Here you're going to be able to see averages, sums of numbers, counts of numbers, right? So I have a set of hidden numbers here, and just by highlighting them, it's giving me the average, the count, the numerical count, the minimum, the maximum, the sum of all of those. And those are the things that we can determine whether we want to see in our status bar or not. Okay. So more on this formatting as we go forward. Okay. Excel help. Obviously you can use Excel help feature for those non-Mac people. Under the help menu, you have help. You can also search and type it in, or you can do what I often do, which is ask Dr. Google or the internet, and I will get Excel help. Usually helps me go from there. So that concludes the chapter 1, section 1 part of our objective, which was the overview of Excel. So this is a good time to transition over to our progress bar. So from a progress bar perspective, we are now moving over to entering, editing, and managing data. The objectives for chapter 1, section 1.2, entering, editing, and managing data, we're going to have the following learning objectives. understand how to enter data into a worksheet, examine how to edit data in worksheets, examine how to autofill data, understand how to delete data from a worksheet use the undo command, examine how to adjust column widths, or row heights in a worksheet, understand how to hide columns and rows, understand how to delete columns and rows, and learn how to move data to different locations in our workbook. Okay. So we're going back to that blank sheet that we've been working on, that we worked on in the last module. If you don't already have it open, please open up your chapter, your CH1 file, because we will continue working on that file. At this point, it is not too late to do a save as. If we haven't done anything to the file, so there is nothing that would get lost. So at this point, I want to bring your attention to page 22 out of the textbook. The importance of this is that they're going to want us to go ahead and start typing information in. And basically it says click on cell A2. That is the intersection of column A, row 2, right? And I'm going to go in there and I'm going to start typing away. It says type month. And this looks funky because, well, you know what? My cap locks is on, so I'm going to undo that. I didn't like how it looked, right? So there's my monthly. Then it tells me to use my right arrow and go over to the next one and type unit sales. And then average price. And I have a sticky keyboard, so forgive me. And then sales dollars. So at this point, I don't want you to worry too much about formatting. We're going to spend a lot of time in formatting, and it's always easier to start by putting your data in first. And so put in your data first, and the last thing we want to go ahead and do is then navigate to do our editing, right? That we can always do our editing later on. That is not the end of the world. And so we edit at the end, okay? So you notice that even though we can't see the entire name or the entire information that we published in here, if we click there, we see that the data is still in our, this is called our formula bar. It's still there, even though we physically can't see it because the width of the column isn't wide enough. And so I will tell you that properly labeling your Excel spreadsheet is critical. Very few of us actually will use Excel and never share that Excel with anybody. What ends up happening is we end up using Excel, and that is ultimately shared with somebody. We either share that with fellow employees, we share it with our spouse, our professors, our superiors, our supervisors, our coworkers. And it is important that we have good spreadsheet etiquette, okay? And the better spreadsheet etiquette we have, the better it's going to be for the next person who has to actually look at that file to understand what it includes, be able to continue to navigate with it, and have a certain level of assurance that they're not looking at garbage. There's a term called GIGO, garbage in, garbage out, and please don't spreadsheet with garbage in, garbage out. Next thing they want us to do is to go to column B, row 3, and type in 2670. And then they want us to hit enter. And by hitting enter, it takes us down to the next row, okay? And in that next row, right? So just by hitting enter, it takes us down to that next row. Now they want us to type 2160 and keep hitting enter all the way down and keep hitting numbers and numbers and numbers and numbers. So I'm going to fast forward to step 4, where I go to column C3 and I add 999. And then I'm fast forwarding to step 7, where in column D3, I add 26685. Okay. And please continue following the steps 3 through 9 while I do a fast forward here. All right. So I've done my fast forward. If you do need to pause your video until you have finished your data collection, this is a good time to go ahead and pause and come back and restart it when you are ready. So please note that none of these things that we entered, we didn't bother putting in dollar signs or commas or decimal points unless it was necessary, right? And so that's good. We do that on purpose. It saves time. It makes it a lot easier to just put in raw data. The next couple of steps that we're going to do is we're going to go through validating, formatting our data, using it in, converting data into information, right? We also want to make sure that we proofread our data. We want to make sure that our numbers are correct, that we didn't make an error. Let's say we did make an error. Let's say this should have been 1999. Well, we can click on it and make an edit on it, right? And so we can do that. We can click on anything, then we can go into our formula bar, edit it there. If it's a simple edit, we can just start typing and Excel will allow us to start editing. Okay. So we fast forwarded. This is what the data looks like. Next thing they want us to do is to go to row 15, column A, and type TOT and hit enter. Okay. Now they want us to show how to use the navigation, the formula bar to edit that tot into total. And so I can use my cursor, I can use my mouse. If I use my cursor, I can actually hit the F2 key, and that puts me into an edit format. The other thing that I could have done is I could have clicked in my formula bar and made the edit. Okay. And so they want us to have basically total there in our total bar. One of the things that they show is that you have these little things that show up to the left. So between the range and the name range box, then we have an X for a cancel, a check mark for an enter, and an FX for a formula. So the check mark will accept it and get you out of that editing. So now your cursor will move. If you're in the edit mode, your cursor will move within the formula bar, not outside of it. So you have to get out of it by clicking the check box or the X to cancel out in order to be able to navigate outside of that formula bar. These come in very handy when you are in a mobile version, whether it's on an iPad or on a touchscreen computer, or you're using this on your telephone, which is an option. It comes in very handy because those keyboard shortcuts aren't always there. So these cancel and edit really do come in handy for you. So we've done that. They still want us to do more stuff, right? They want us to go and see what else they want us to do. They want us to go and A15, and actually they want us to add total sales, right? So that it actually says total sales instead of just total, right? Then they want us to go into A3 and type in January. And so Excel, obviously it's good with numbers, but it's not just numbers that it's good with. So I want to show you one of the autofill features that Excel has. And that is that once we have an active field, we know that this is the active cell. It's got the green box around it. There's this little green square that shows up on the bottom right-hand side. And then actually, if you put your cursor over that, there's certain options that come up, right? You have the big white cross. You have the four like the smaller hash box, like arrows with points at the end of it. Well, what do these things do? Well, the one with the points will basically move it for you, right? So that's puts you into a move capability. The one with the plus, the big one, basically gets you into the formula bar. The one that I'm looking for now is just the solid black. The solid black, if I left click and drag down, notice that it auto-fills the month sequence for me. And when I let go of my mouse, it auto-filled every single month for me. Now, Excel's trying to make things easy for us. Now, we don't always want to make things easy for ourselves. We could, and it knows that, so it has a menu on the bottom. So there is a drop down that we can select and say, okay, well, you know what? I didn't really want you to fill the series for me. I actually wanted you to copy the cells, and it would do basically copy the month January all the way down. Versus filling the series. And then depending on what data we put in, it would allow us to fill the series with months, days, years, depending on what our initial data is. In this case, we only put in January, but Excel will allow us to store date in a day, month, year format. And so based on that, it would allow us to fill any one of those series out there. Okay. So that's just a cute little neat thing. We're going to use that a lot as we move forward. I will tell you that there's some other things that are going to be important for us, right? So you know that fill handle, that little green square at the bottom, that fill handle is super important. We're going to use it a lot, but there are other things that we can do, right? We can do, there's Excel's going to give you 2, 3, 4 different ways of doing things. This point, I'm following along the book. Every once in a while, I will interject something else for you. But at this point, we're good. As we did that editing, as we did that quick fill, right? It was giving us a preview of what the pre-filled data was going to be, right? And that's important because if you would have kept going, it would have overridden total sales with January, right? So, right, and so that preview is important, right? Don't worry too much about presentation yet because things are wonky, right? We have all sorts of crazy stuff. But just how we had that quick fill option, we basically have the opposite, right? So we can go and we can highlight a range of cells, and we can use that same button and erase data, right? So that's another option that's available for us, right? And give me 1 sec because I couldn't see my undo button. There we go. I was in an Excel format and in Zoom, and I could not see my menu to undo. Okay. So we're basically back in our data. Control Z, actually the next page reminded me that Control Z would let me undo. We have additional editing tools. So over here in the home ribbon under editing, we have a clear where we can actually use the clear all to clear that information, right? All right, now on the top, on the bottom of page 34, it's going to allow us to start manipulating the size, the width, and the height of our columns and our rows. And so if I put my cursor in between two columns, and the columns, remember, are identified by the letters, right? If I put my cursor there and I select my left click, I can drag that column, make it smaller, make it wider. Other thing I can do is I can double click it and it will automatically fit the column width to accommodate the data that I have in there. But I can also do it to multiple columns at once. By highlighting the columns, I can adjust the size of all of them, auto size all of them, or I can, and in this case I did a right click, I could predetermine the width that I want for each column. And so I could type 13 and it would automatically make each column 13. Okay. So those are 3 or 4 different ways on how we adjust columns. That's important because remember that when we started this, we couldn't see the month of October, the month of September completely. If we click and we drag, we also see the micro adjustments where we see the size, how many pixels will fit. The pixels have to do with the inch, right? And so there's 72 pixels in an inch. And so depending on how high or wide, that's how, how it's represented from a size perspective. Worthless trivia. Kind of flash through here because a lot of this is, they're taking a bunch of different steps on how to do it and doing it in different directions. One of the better practices tells us that we want to keep some space when we have our totals. And so one option is we leave a blank row in between. That's an option. The other option, which is the one they're asking us to do, is to essentially make that row higher so there's plenty of space, or there is a gap in between both rows. And so, I could right click, adjust the row height to 30. I had done it manually. That's fine. Also, we have plenty of options, and nothing is permanent, so we can continue adjusting these things as we go. So let's say that we don't care about average price, but we don't want to delete it. We could actually hide the column. Now we know that's a hidden column because we have a gap between C and D, all right, or between B and D. The letter C is hiding, so we can right click, unhide, and we can do that for our columns, and we can do that for our rows. Now, from a feature perspective, it's the same thing whether you are deleting, right, or you are hiding. The difference is that if it's hidden, it'll still be there, and in some cases it'll still calculate. So we can hide, well, we don't have any formulas here yet, but I'll show you when we actually have some formulas here. I'll show you how hiding doesn't impact anything as we go. But I will use this opportunity to tell you that when you are using an Excel spreadsheet that has been provided to you, whether it's work or whatever, pay very, very, very close attention to anything that might be hidden in there. It is a good practice to select everything, and you can select everything using that top left hand. It'll select every row, every column in your spreadsheet, and then right click and you can hit unhide, and anything that was hidden could be unhidden at once that way. It's a good practice to make sure that you don't have anything hidden, because that can really, really mess up your Excel spreadsheets. This is a good opportunity to remind people to trust but verify. Basically, it is, very important. Trust but verify. You want to make sure that the formulas make sense. When we get into formulas, we'll see some tools that Excel has built in to help us stay honest. It'll give us some tips if formulas have changed. It'll let us, follow certain things to make sure we're still doing them right. Let's say we needed to insert a column. We could right click, insert. We can do the same thing to rows. We can click insert, and so basically if I click on the letter and I click insert, it knows I want to add a row. I can click on the row and delete. That will delete a row. But if I click on a cell and I right click that, and when I go to delete, it's going to ask me, or I go to insert, it's going to ask me what I want to do. And that'll allow me to either shift one cell left, one cell up, one row, one column, right? And so in this case, I want the row, right click, delete, and I want the column. And now I'm back to the basic sheet. Now, that's not it. I could also go to the insert, to the insert. Actually, you know what? I think it's in my home. Insert, it's going to be under, in this case, my menu shrunk, my ribbon shrunk, but over here where it says cells, I can go ahead and insert cells, and it would let me insert either a new worksheet, a row, or a column. Okay, so that's a neat feature. Again, 3 or 4 different ways on how we can do it. For me, the right click is the easiest. I guess if you are on a Mac, since you don't have the right click option, you might have to do a little bit more manipulation, but for me, it doesn't matter. Already showed you how to move data. So you select it and you can move it. You can move it back. And so on the Mac, instead of the solid, instead of the arrows with the points on them, on the Mac, you will actually get a hand looking thing. And once you click on that hand, you can move it around. Again, if you are using a touchscreen version, very similar, where you hold it down, it's then becomes movable for you and you can move data. Moving data is sometimes a good thing. Sometimes it's a bad thing. And Excel is usually good enough so that when you do have a formula and you do make a move, it will allow you to remember how that move happened. And should update formulas for you. Now, it doesn't always do it. And so we have to, when we get to that chapter, we'll see how to make sure that when we do move, add, delete, we are protecting the integrity of our formulas. Okay. If you delete if you go to delete one of these tabs on the bottom, that is not something that you can undo. So be very careful with that. At this point, this concludes the second part of this module. So at this point, we want to go ahead and make sure we have done a file save as, and we have saved our file. Okay. I'm going to rename the tab just because I'm not going to resave the file. I'm working on a live file, so I don't need to resave it, but I'm going to call it Chapter 1, Merchandise City. Okay. That way we know what we're talking about. So hello, everybody. Welcome back. We're using Fundamental Skills, Chapter 1, out of Excel for, doesn't matter. All right, welcome back, everybody. We're doing Fundamental Skills, continuing in Chapter 1 out of Excel 2019. The section we're going to cover now is our formatting and data analysis. So we'll be in formatting and data analysis for now. So let's click to see what our objectives are going to be for this section. And so we're going to basically be doing formatting and data analysis. Our learning objectives are going to include use formatting techniques that we've already introduced. We're going to talk about some Excel spreadsheet guidelines and some best practices. We're going to understand how we can align data in cell locations. We'll examine how to enter multiple lines of text into one cell. We'll understand how to add borders to worksheets, examine how to use the AutoSum feature to calculate totals, use cut, copy, paste commands, understand how to move, rename, insert, and delete worksheet tabs as well. So thank you for continuing on this journey. Let's open up the Chapter 1 Merchandise City file that we were working on last module, and let's continue from there. On page 50 of your textbook, and I'm going to go to the textbook so that you don't have to. So that should be electronic version 57. There's a Excel guideline for correct accounting format and chart range. And we haven't done charts. We haven't formatted any of our numbers, but this is just an image that the book's publishers, the book's authors wanted us to see and understand some just best practices. And so what we see here is, we've got a title, we've got some information there. The data is kind of formatted with rows and columns. Some of the stuff has rows. Some of the stuff has dollar signs. Other does not. And so basically, when we're dealing with currency, we should add the dollar sign to the top and the bottom numbers. Everything else in between should just be comma style numbers. And decimal points are only required if any of your data actually has decimals. If you don't need decimals, you can hide the decimals. Excel will auto round up for you, or it depends on how your Excel settings are, but it should round up for you. And then using the borders, you should have a top border, bottom border. Depending on what we're looking at, we sometimes have a single line on top, a double line on the bottom. Excel has all sorts of different options for us. When we do a chart, there is no need to include the total column into our chart, right? So in this case, we did not need to look at totals because Excel is going to do that for us. And in order to compare, in this particular chart that we're looking at, the totals are meaningless because we are comparing different cities to each other. And so in this case, there was no need to include totals in our formatting. Now, as we continue, there's some more information. This is a different version. And so at very least, we want to make sure that we've identified the name of the company, what kind of report we're looking at, and what the date of that is. Now, that could be an as of date or for the month of date. It could be an actual date like today, like the date that we opened or we printed the file. We can also do things like mixing data. And so in this case, we see that we have the city, the number of trips, the sales dollars per trip. And so once you have mixed data, you absolutely have to identify what data is just a plain number versus what data is a currency. Okay, so in this case, all of our numbers would be currency, would have the dollar sign to represent that they were currency. In this case, none of the numbers have decimal points, so we didn't need decimals. We were able to decrease the formatting to hide those numbers. Spell check. Excel does have a spell check feature. However, it is not automatic. Because it is not automatic, you manually must run a spell check in your Excel worksheet. Print preview. Make sure that your work, you are able to print it. Because sometimes you're going to send this to somebody else who may want to print it. Last thing you want to do is have to format your print area so that something prints properly. We're going to dedicate a section of this chapter to printing and preparing our document for printing. Use common sense proofreading. Make sure you don't make mistakes. Make sure your worksheets look professional. You also want to get into a habit where you kind of do things over and over and over, and eventually coworkers will be able to identify whose spreadsheet it was, because we all spreadsheet a little bit differently. And so it's almost as if a fingerprint is built into the spreadsheet based on how you individually format things. Okay. Now, some companies have very detailed templates and always want you to format information in the same way, etc. That is a good practice. That is a best practice as well. Okay. And so just wanted to highlight that on page 50 and 51 of the book, they go through some best practices, right? We're not working on these files. They're just kind of best practices. So going back to our merchandise sales file, merchandise city sales file, let's go ahead and keep going, right? So it wants us to go ahead and start, formatting some of our information. So let's go and highlight A2 to D2, select A2 to D2, and they want us to make it bold. They want us to make it italicized. Okay. Just by clicking those, right, we can make them bold, we can make them italicized, right? We can also add a border to our data, all right, because we had those rows selected, so we could basically add a border to it. Also wants us to go and highlight A15 to D15, and what they want us to do is they want us to make that bold. All right. And then they want us to add a border on the top of this data. So we do the little down click on the borders, we select top border. Now we have a border, right? We could also have gone and kept the bottom border, but just done it on row 14 instead of the top border. Right. Let's so let's format our numbers, right? We can select B3 through B14, and we can convert those into numbers. So a couple options, I can right click and this menu pops up, right? There's my dollars. I can convert that to currency. It applied decimal points to it. I can reduce the number of decimal points. I can come over here on my home tab under the ribbon area for numbers. I can increase or decrease my commas. I can do comma separated without the dollar sign. Okay. Different options. Okay. Basically, remember that the best practice was that the top and the bottom were formatted with the dollar symbol. Okay. So that formatting will occur when we actually put numbers or formulas into this. Okay. Let's put some color here, right? So let's use the fill feature to fill our top 4 rows. And the colors are all different depending on your setup, but I selected something similar to what the book had. Because it's so dark, I'm going to want to change the font to be white. And I'm also going to want to make the font a little bit bigger because that's going to be my heading for this company. Now, when I click on A1 and I type the title, right? That format came over, right? And so if I hadn't changed the color, right, it would be hard to read, but it was that easy to change the color, right? Now it wants me to go ahead and italicize that. It wants me to actually make it Arial, so change the font. And it wants me to bold it. Okay. So what else can we do? Well, we can do a couple other things. Let's show something here. Sometimes if our column's not wide enough, we get these number signs, and that just basically means that there's data there that's a number. We can't see it because the column width was too small, so we can adjust the column width there. Let's go ahead and select A2 to D2, and we're going to allow for a wrapping. Actually, we're going to make it centered, right? And so we can center the data, and we're going to center it top and down as well. One of the other things that we can do is we can select that to wrap, and now some of our titles will show up over multiple rows for us. And that automatically got adjusted. So now we could come back and do the same thing to any of our data, and we can adjust the width of our columns. Remember, we can select multiple columns as well. There we go. Just options for us, okay? So the wrapping text gives us a lot of flexibility. This merchandise city doesn't look centered. So how do we get this centered? Well, we can't really use the center button because that complicates things. Excel does have another feature where we select the 4 columns in that row. Has this feature here that's called merge and center. And when we click on it, it will actually merge all of those into just one cell. So now there are no longer 4 cells there. It is only one. We can undo that by unmerging it. There's another way of doing this. We can basically right-click, format cells, alignment. One of the options that we have here is called center across the selection. And it basically gets us to the same look, except that the data stayed in column A, row 1. It did not get merged. And so the merging is there. However, if we use it too often, it may create problems where under the center across selection allows us to still use math based on that column A information if we needed to. That's a personal preference. I am not a big fan of the merge and center, although this isn't a perfect use case for that. One of the things that they want us to do, this is on page 62, is they want us to come and add a second row of information below merchandise city sales. And so if we go into our formula bar, we can basically hit Alt Enter at the end of it. And what it'll do is it'll add a second row so that we can bring in retail sales. Now, I still can't see it. Well, that's because my row height is not long enough, is not high enough. And so, I could adjust it that way. Remember that if I double click, it'll give me well, actually, in this case, it shrunk it to 1. I can right click, row height, say 30, and it fits it there perfect, right? Oh, I know what. This formatting is not right because unit sales, that's not currency. That should be commas. Then because I have mixed units, in this case, I actually should have the dollar signs on everything because these are units, not pricing. Okay. Borders, there's a bunch of different options, right? One of the easy ways to do is to use the pre-made preferences, right? And so this is a pre-filled one, and then here by doing 2 clicks of the pre-filled options, I kind of did actually, you know what? I did not do, I didn't select it right. But I can kind of replicate what the book wants with clicking out there. However, there is the ability to customize the border options, and you could essentially select the line, put it however you want, and it'll go ahead and, do all sorts of borders for you where you can customize whether you want an outline, top, bottom, and you can keep playing with those until you get the table to how you want it. Now, I had already formatted this, so I did not follow the steps on page 65 because for me that was not important. Grid lines absolutely make it easier to understand and follow the data. Okay. Absolutely, absolutely. So let's talk about some formulas here. And the next chapter will deal with the mathematical computations, etc. Not this chapter, but we are still going to use it for a couple of different formulas. And so we're going to click on column B, row 15. We're going to go to our formulas tab, and we're going to go insert an auto sum. And what that's going to do is it says, okay, based on where you put me, there are numbers above me that I'm assuming, or Excel is assuming, it wants us to auto calculate. And if I just hit enter, there we are. Now, it did not, it put the dollar sign in there. So I'm going to go change that to commas, and I'm going to delete the numbers because this is for units, right? Now, remember the autofill that we did for the months? Well, we're going to be able to do the autofill here. So clicking on the left, dragging that to the right, and we're going to be able to autofill that. And so we have the totals, right? We know that the dollars, well, that should be dollars. So let's put the currency symbol on there, delete the decimals. Still not big enough, so let's make it a little bit bigger. The total of our average sales, does that make any sense to us? Nah, I don't think so, but let's see what else we can do. Well, we can do an average, we could do a maximum. Oh, and guess what? You know what? Maybe we do want decimals here because this had decimals. So let's increase our decimal points there. And if we increase our decimal points here, we see that the maximum price here was $19.99. Now, Excel's giving me a warning here, says, hey, the formula in this cell is different from the formula in the area in this area of the spreadsheet, right? Because all of the others were totaling all the numbers above me. And Excel is just pointing it out to me. It's still letting me do it, but it is pointing it out to me. Okay, so the minimum price was $19.99. The maximum price. So minimum $9.99, maximum $19.99. But it's not really a relevant number. So we're going to delete that number because it doesn't mean anything to us, right? And so now we've completed bringing in data. Actually, there's one more. It said count numbers. So how many numbers are above us? There are 12 different items up there, right? We know that because there's 12 months, right? So just, different functions that are pre-filled for us, basically let us, without knowing how to program or code Excel, it let us go in and quickly and easily put in some formulas. So at this point, I'm going to tell you that this is probably a good time to do a spell check. And so I'm going to basically click on the review tab, click on spelling, and it says, do you want to continue at the beginning of the sheet? Sure. And my spell check was good, right? Next thing they want us to do is they want us to rename that tab to sales by month. Because basically what we have there is a representation of our sales by month. They also want us to add a tab and call that tab unit sales rank. And then it says, I'm not really sure that I want it. So you know what? Delete it. And it did. So now there's our tab. There's our spreadsheet. This is a good opportunity to go ahead and look at the totals and make sure that the totals that we are looking at on your spreadsheet match the totals that's on page 72. This would tell you if there were any mistakes, data entry mistakes that you might have made. And so it's really easy to go ahead and do that. Location of where we save our files. Okay. We sometimes save our files and Microsoft came up with OneDrive a couple of years ago. I'm a huge fan of OneDrive. One of the reasons I like OneDrive so much is that it lets me look at different version histories. So if I did something that I wanted to undo, like a dramatic undo, so let's say I wanted to go back to a point in time before I started this lecture, I could go ahead and go back to the last time I opened it, which was at 11. I could go through the different edits that I went doing, right? And so it lets me go back and make changes to the file if I wanted to. Okay. So the versioning it's an important thing. And then once you're there, you need to resave. If you've opened up a different version of the document, you need to resave it, or you can close it, or you can go back to File and open up the file that you were working on, right? And so that versioning is really important, and it's really facilitated for us through OneDrive. So I hope that was useful to you. Again, save your work, make sure you've got it saved. We will be using it on the next chapter as we go through, on the next module as we go formatting the print options. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Beginning Excel 2019. Just tracking the progress. This is chapter 1, fundamental skills. We are now at the printing stage of this chapter. That is section 1.4 of the book, which is printing. So learning objectives in section 1.4 are going to be using the page layout tab to prepare our worksheet for printing, adding headers and footers to a printed worksheet, examine how to print worksheets and workbooks, and that will basically complete the bulk of this chapter, but for 2 additional exercises there. So let's get right into it. This is where we left off last time. This is our Merchandise Cities USA retail sales by month. And now let's look at page setup. So when we look at our page layout menu, that brings up this ribbon, we have this page setup area. The bottom right, we've got a page setup. So we don't find something above, we can do this page setup button and it'll bring us into like a different setup. For the Mac people, you actually have an icon that's called page setup. So let's go ahead and click that page setup. And there's a couple things that we can do, right? We can first make sure that we fit our work to one page. We can change the orientation to landscape or portrait. We can, under the margins tab, we can adjust our margins, but we can also center our information horizontally and vertically so that it always comes up in the middle of our tab, of our page. We can do a print preview so we can see what that's going to look like. On page 76, there's a list of all of the page setup features, margins, orientation, size. Paper size is important. I want to talk about paper size for a moment. Your paper size here, the options that show up are going to be predetermined by the options that your printer is capable of handling. However, there are sometimes larger format printers where you can either send it to print to an Office Depot or something like that, or if you're at work, you can send it to print to your copier, right? To the big network printer copier, and that way you can do it. The 3 standard paper sizes that we're going to be dealing with are going to be letter, which is 8.5 by 11, legal, 8.5 by 14, and ledger, which is 11 by 17, right? So it's it is as wide as a letter, but double the size. So basically 2 letter size papers side by side. That's the equivalent of a ledger. Okay, it makes it a lot easier to see a lot of complicated information. Now, If it's not available, I recommend changing your default printer to potentially the PDF printer or something like that. And that way you would have that bigger format. You always want to format your print setup for that person who may print it and how they're going to print it, right? And so, it's a good practice, okay? The print area, you can select the area that you want to print, right? So I just noticed that my borders weren't perfect. But in that page layout, you can highlight what you want to print area, right click, set print area. You can do that, no problem. You can decide where you want your page breaks. You can decide, in this case, it all fits on one page, so the page breaks window is not there. Remember, we had at the bottom right by the zoom bar or the zoom area, we had the page break view. Here, it's showing you that all of this is going to fit on page 1. And so there is no need to move our page breaks, right? So there we go. Printing titles. If your document's going to multiple pages, you absolutely want to print titles. So for example, you can go in and say, hey, I don't care if this does go to 2 pages, every page I do, I want to make sure that I have row 1 and 2 showing up, because that's important. So let's say that we went here and we inserted a page break. Now, when we go do our oh, I gotta change my setup because I said print it all on one page. So now, when I go to my second page, look how the name and the second row, monthly unit, carried over. If I did not have my print titles, look how bad my second page would look like. I wouldn't know what those numbers represent. That's a bad practice. Don't do that. Don't be that person. Now we can solve that by when we do our page setup, we can tell it, make it fit to one page. Then we don't have to worry about the page breaks, right? That's the information on 76. There's a lot more detail about what all of those things mean. Next thing we want to do are headers and footers. And there's this insert tab. And in the insert ribbon, there's a headers and footers that I don't see because my icons are so large. But if I scroll over to text and I do the down arrow on text, there is a insert text header and footer. And I click that. And this header and footer allows me to do a bunch of stuff. Okay. Now it looks kind of funky because my document is centered, right? And so because I'm centered, it kind of looks a little odd, right? But I still have my header area. And I can click on this header area, and it basically gives me a left side of my header, a center side of my header, or a right side of my header. And we have different options. Now, over to the right-hand side, we now have a specific menu, and this is called the dynamic ribbon. A ribbon, a tab, and a ribbon that only show up because we are editing our header. And because we're editing our header, the options that are available on this ribbon are very specific to headers and footers. So the first thing we can do is we can select a give me the current date header. in the middle section, we can put your name. And you will put your name on that when you submit your work. We can then go down to the footer. And so there's a button here that says, go to the footer. We click the go to the footer. Again, we have those same 3 tabs. I have to click the header footer tab again. Now I can tell it that I want the page numbers to show up there. And by doing so, I can click back anywhere on my spreadsheet, go back to that normal view. And I don't see anything, but if I do my print preview, I now see the date, the student name, and the page number on the bottom. Obviously, there's a lot more customization that you can do, okay? This is a good point if you need to do a file print, save it as a PDF, whatever. This is a good opportunity to save your work because this concludes this part of the lecture. Next thing we'll do is we'll go ahead and cover section 1.5, which is the chapter practice. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Beginning Excel 2019. We are in the mastering phase. We last did printing, which brings us to the next thing, which is a chapter practice. Remember, we are using, we're doing chapter 1, fundamental skills, out of this textbook. If you don't already have the textbook, here's a link to where you can get that. But we're in the chapter practice, okay? In the chapter practice, there is a file that we are being asked to download. And so we click on the objectives. The objective for section 1.5 out of chapter 1, it is on physical printed page 80 out of the textbook. And there is if you're doing this on the electronic version, there is a hyperlink to where you can download the file. Now, I have downloaded that file that we're going to use. I have brought that in, and I have brought it in as PR1 data. That is the actual name on page 80 of the file that you will download. Now, this is a good opportunity to pause if you don't already have it and come back once you've got that in place. So welcome back. What we have here is some information that has been brought in for the practice file. And this chapter practice file is basically going to be a basic monthly budget for a medical office. So a couple things that they want us to do is they want us to go ahead and change the font on everything. So I'm going to select everything. I'm going to select Arial as I'm being instructed. And I'm going to change that to size 12. They want me to change the size of column A. I'm just going to double click in between. And everything else now is visible. Okay. They want me to go to cell B2 and type in Q1. Now, remember the autofills that we've done in previous lessons? We did an autofill for month. We did an autofill that copied our formulas over. What do you think is going to happen when I do this autofill? And remember the autofill, we select the cell. It's highlighted in green. We left click on that bottom right, hold that down, have the black cross across, drag it over, and look at what that autofill did for us. It autofilled the series. And so we went from Q1 to it populating all the way out to quarter four, right? That's cool, right? Really, really cool. That autofill, very, very useful. Remember that autofill handle here, we have this menu, we have options. We can do it with formatting, without formatting. We can copy the cells, which would only have the same, or fill a cell that transfers everything else over. Okay. It wants us to go to 1A. And in 1A, it wants us to type in medical office budget. Okay. Wants us to put in a blank column. So I right click, inserted a column. Wants me to call that column budget cost. Okay. I'm going to leave the sizing for this where it is for right now. It wants me to take A1 through F1 and merge and center. Also wants me to bold it, italicize it, add a color, change the font to white. Wants me to make it higher. I've adjusted the height. Wants me to go ahead and bold row 2. Wants me to fill it with some kind of a tan color. And it wants me to center the titles. Now I could also wrap, and that way I can adjust my numbers accordingly. It wants me to go to this number, the salaries, and it wants me to copy that number all the way over. And if I left click on the little autofill, I can drag that over. So let's see what happens when I click on that down. It says copy cells or fill cells. And if I fill the cells, it increases that number by 1 every column I go over. In this case, we're sticking with the copy cells. That is another very, very common mistake that people make. And if you're doing it on something like an interest rate, it'll very easily throw your data out of whack. Wants us to do the same thing for the bottom 3, because our rent, office supplies, and phone expenses are about the same every month. What it wants us to do now is it wants us to calculate budgets for each one of the total quarters so we know what our annual budget is. Well, we can go ahead and go back to that formulas tab. Let's hit the auto sum. But this time it doesn't really know what we want to auto sum. But we can tell it by highlighting the 4 cells that we wanted to auto sum. We hit enter. Now we've auto summed. Now we can come down and fill that formula all the way down. Wants us to format our numbers. So these numbers wants us to use accounting without decimal points. Now we can do some borders. So let's go ahead and select everything. Let's do internal borders. And then a big thick border around the outside. Let's right click and rename this tab as budget. I have to rename it as something else because I had a budget tab already. You cannot have tabs with the same names. What else do we have to do? Well, let's do a print preview so we can look and see what it looks like. Even though it fits, it's not really good. So let's do the page setup. Let's make it fit to one page. Let's turn it landscape. Let's center it horizontally and vertically. Look at that. Much better. But we're not done. We need headers and footers. So headers and footers, this is another way of doing it. From the page setup, we can enter a custom header. Remember, we were entering the date, and in the center, we were entering the student name. Then we can go to a custom footer, and in the bottom right, enter the page number. And now when we do the print preview, we've got everything. Yes, folks, that was easier than the other way that we did the footers, but it's good to know the different ways of doing it. Folks, that concludes the practice of PR1, Medical Office, for this chapter. So I wish you the best of luck. Thank you all. See you next time. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Beginning Excel 2019. Those of you following along, this is the fundamental skills from chapter 1. We started with overview of Excel and have kind of worked our way through. The last chapter we discussed was the chapter practice, which brings us to the assessment today. And so this assessment, and I will walk through this assessment with you. It is not that I'm doing the work for you, but I just using this as a walkthrough so that individuals understand how the work should be done. If you don't already have your file ready, this is a good opportunity to go ahead and download it. Out of page 83 of the textbook, the scored assessment does require you to download a file called SC1 data that is available from Open Oregon publisher. So let me get to my tab. All right, here is the data that we downloaded, and it is not very pretty. So let's go ahead and start working on it. And I'm on page 83. And as we start working with it, basically, there's a bunch of stuff that we want to kind of start doing. Tells us that they want us to go to C14 and type in totals, plural. Then they want us to format all cells so that they use a font called Century. Now I can scroll or I can start typing. Until I get there. And it wants me to make it 12. So I can do the drop down, but I can also use the up and down in order to get to there. they're telling me to make column widths A through G a uniform 13.5. Okay. Now they want us to go to cell B2 and make that item numbers or item number. Okay. Now they want us to autofill this item number. They want us to autofill that all the way down. And look at what happened. Excel autofilled it by adding 1 to each one of those numbers. It says we don't need column F. Oh, I'm sorry. Before we do that, it wants us to take this number, this fall 2018, and copy it all the way down. That did an autofill that's not what we wanted, so we can click and say, nope, just copy the cells, and it will do that for us. That's one way. We could have also gone copy, highlighted the other cells, right click, and pasted the information. So a couple of different ways of doing that. They're asking us to delete column F. Bye-bye. And now they want us to format A1 through F2 to be bold. They also want us to wrap the information on row 2. And they want us to get A1 through F1 ready for the title by changing the fill, in this case, to something red. And they want us to use a white font again. They want us to italicize. And they want us to use a 14-point font. They also want us to merge and center. Next thing for us to do would be to enter the report. The report name, right? Status, reports. They want us to add a second line. Remember, to add the second line, we're going to hit the Alt+. Now, I lost the second line because I was looking at a formula bar that only had one row. I can expand the formula bar by the right-hand side of the formula bar. I have a drop-down, click it, and it expands it. And now on the second row, I can type in sales and inventory by item. All right. Now I still don't see it because the width is not the same. So I can drag that down until I have a wider row. It wants us to format these numbers with the $sign. There are decimal points, so that is fine. We'll keep those there. And then E, it wants us to use commas, but no decimal points. On E14, they want us to do an auto sum. So we go back, we go E14, then formulas, then auto sum. It adds an auto sum there, or it calculates the range there. They want us to do the same thing in the next column. I could just click auto sum, or I could have dragged it over. By dragging it over, it copies over the formatting, unless I select another option to do it without the formatting. The inventory and units, I'm going to also put it in numbers without decimal points. Okay. So let's go ahead and give everybody borders. I'm going to shrink my zoom here a little bit so that we can see the entire page at once. So I've added borders to everything. It wants me to add a thick bottom border for row 2. And 13. So 2 and 13. And let's do the entire outside of the form. Wants us to rename it status of SC1. So let's look to see what this looks like. Let's do our page setup. I don't like it. Page setup. Let's fit it to one page. Let's go landscape, center horizontally, center vertically, custom headers. We're starting with date, student name in the middle. We go to our header, our footer. We're going to enter the page number, not there. We want it on the right selection. Hit OK. Hit OK. Now look at the preview. There we have it. That concludes chapter 1. Hopefully you stick around for our next video where we will do mathematical computations in chapter 2. Thank you all.